Welcome back to the channel, guys. Hugh, Carnahan, the Kaizen Man here, and today we have an incredible treat for you. We are going to be going into a new series, and it is a podcast theme. We're basically doing interviews, but it's called Lean Without Borders. We have a great episode. Our very first guest is incredible. He's a member of the United States Army, and he took lean methods and applied them to that. Remember, I took lean methods, applied them to personal finance and real estate, and became a millionaire in 15 months. He did this, and he saved lives. It's absolutely incredible. But as a precautionary portion, I wanted to let you guys know we had a camera equipment failure, and that equipment failure basically meant that we only have one camera angle. We had 3 cameras set up, but 2 failures. And so the content is absolutely fantastic. I just wanted you guys to know to stick around for that, but it'll be kind of meh for as far as the footage goes. So sorry about that in advance. We'll get to it right now. What's up, guys? Hugh Carnahan, the Kaizen Man here, and we are bringing to you the first ever podcast we have. And this is called Lean Without Borders.
So basically, the whole concept is, how do you take lean out of the manufacturing space and into your everyday, into other industries, and really drive in that impact and that value that lean has to offer. So we're really excited about this series, and we can't wait to dive in. Our first guest is a good friend of Hugh's,
Right.
the infamous.
It is Mr. Sam Balch.
Hi guys, I don't know which camera to look at.
No,
We have like 8 of them.
So Sam, tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you do?
Yeah, so I'm a captain in the United States Army, and I'm a field artillery officer, or like a fire support officer. So it's my job to plan, resource, coordinate, and execute all types of fire support systems, whether it be artillery, like howitzers, mortars, aircraft, if we're like dropping bombs with bombers or fighters, F-15s, F-18s, and rocket artillery. So we have a couple of systems called like the HIMARS and the MLRS that we use to shoot rockets upwards of, sometimes 30, 40, 50 miles.
So you're the guy who makes things go all explodey, as Hugh likes to say.
Yeah, all explodey, yeah.
You're the guy.
I'm the guy. I used to definitely make them go explodey when I was a lieutenant. As a captain, I'm more in charge of the processes and the planning and the coordinating. So kind of like the idea guy and giving guidance for other people to go execute it. Yeah.
So these are complex processes. There's a lot of moving parts.
Oh yeah.
And one thing we really kind of wanted to dive into is, from your experience, as you try to organize and manage and improve upon a lot of, the day-to-day operations in your field, what are some of the inefficiencies you've come across? What challenges are you facing in the armed forces with specifically related to what you do?
No, absolutely. So to your first point, like it is an extremely complicated process. So I've been in the Army for almost 8 years, and it's taken 8 years to just understand the scope and the massive processes and bureaucratic nonsense that exists in trying to get a fire mission like processed and executed, right? So we have this thing called the sensor to shooter kill chain. And so what that means is, there's a guy out on the front lines with the infantry who's called a forward observer, and he sees a tank or some things that he needs to blow up. So he picks up his radio and he calls his boss and say, hey, I need artillery support at this location, and this is kind of what I'm looking for. Mm-hmm. His boss processes it. He says, okay, what is the most appropriate weapon system for me to use? Is it mortars? Is it helicopters? Is it artillery? And then he's like, well, I need to use artillery, and I need to call my boss so he can coordinate to get that artillery. So he calls his boss at the battalion level. And then we do the exact same thing at the battalion level, where it's like we try to determine if we have the own organic capability to support them with what we have. If the answer is no, it goes to another echelon, and then they determine what it needs to be. And at the brigade level, it's typically like, okay, they need artillery support, so now we're going to send it over to the artillery battalion, where another entity receives it. And they say, okay, we're going to support the guy on the front line, and what is the most appropriate firing unit that we have available to us to execute it? In an artillery battalion, you have 3 firing batteries. You have an Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie battery. Like, Alpha battery's over here doing something, Charlie battery's over here, so Bravo. We're going to send it to Bravo battery. So then they send it to the Bravo battery, what we call the fire direction center. And they receive the information, the targeting data, and they translate that into actionable. I need to point the gun this direction in order for and shoot this charge at this height to get the round to land where I want it to go. And they calculate that data and they transmit those fire commands down to the actual howitzer, which actually executes the fire mission.
So,
whoa.
So, Sam, for our listeners out there, everything you just described. So there's a guy that's being shot at.
Yeah.
And then he's like, "I need help." And then
this is super weird. Is
your basement haunted? And then what happens? So all that's happening.
Well, all of this needs to happen before even a single shot is fired.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah. Before a round leaves the cannon, all of that stuff needs to happen.
Every single time.
The way that we currently do it, yes, every single time, because there's a lot of decision making that is involved in it, right? And we over the past 100 years, we've developed physical systems, mainly the advent of like digital communications, that have drastically sped that process up. But every place you have what we call an intervention point, where a human is involved in either the decision making or the transmission of information, it always takes 2 to 5 minutes, because we have to receive the information. He was drinking a cup of coffee, and then he gets a notification that says, "Hey, someone's being shot at and is requesting your support." He's like, "Oh, hey, you get over here." And then we get into the computer, we pull it up, and we plot it on an analog map. So yeah, like it happens every time, and the whole time it's happening, a guy is like getting shot at. Yeah.
So they need help, and then all this happens to happen each time.
Yeah.
So how long does that generally take, if you're allowed to share that with us?
Yeah. So the average in the Army right now at what we have combat training centers is about 30 minutes.
So someone's like, "I'm being shot at."
For artillery. It's about 30 minutes. Yeah. For mortars, it's a lot more responsive, but just because there's less involved with shooting mortars. But for artillery, it's about 30 minutes.
So 30 minutes. They're gonna be pinned down. They need to get somewhere, and they're just waiting. Hopefully, they're just waiting to move. But they could be someone's under fire.
Yeah.
And it takes 30 minutes for you guys to assist.
Yeah. And by that time, you hit what we in the artillery community call target decay, meaning that as soon as I hit a certain amount of time, what I was going to shoot at is probably not there anymore. Mm-hmm. Right. So 30 minutes most of the time, we shoot and then it's not there. In combat in the Middle East, in Afghanistan, Syria, and Iraq over the past 20 years, we have certain processes in place to drastically speed that up. But when you look at the Army as a whole, like in our training, it normally takes an extremely long time for a whole slew of reasons. But the main one is that there's just so much waste involved with the current process that we use.
Okay.
Yeah.
So speaking of waste, this whole podcast is about how lean applies to more than just manufacturing. So obviously, you're not manufacturing at all. You're in the military, in charge of artillery barrages. How did you find out about lean? What was your background with it? Like, what do you know?
Yeah, so if you recall, you were the one who actually talked to me about 2-second lean. You gave me Paul Akers' book, which is which was awesome. And initially, I thought the same thing. I was like, it doesn't really apply to manufacturing. I'm not building cars. I'm not making flashlights. How do you actually apply it, right? And the overall synopsis of the book, and Paul goes out of his way to make this point. It's not about the individual action that you're trying to improve. It's about an overall way of thinking, or the overall process, or the education and the way that you analyze and solve complex problems, right? And everything that we do in life is a process, whether you are creating a physical product or whether you are creating something else that somebody needs, like an artillery strike, so but that's really when I got into it. I think it was so I've been in the Army for 8 years, so it was probably within the first year or two that I was in the Army. It was early on. Unfortunately, I was just a young second lieutenant, so I didn't really understand how to apply it until I was a first lieutenant working on a division artillery staff, where we were in charge of the training and certification of the units there of the artillery units there at my base in Fort Carson, Colorado.
So what I understand, I'd like to get into you've done some really incredible things, as I understand it, within the military. It completely changed the way artillery is handled. So we'd like to kind of steer into the direction of that. In our next section, is called the Waste Eradication Deep Dive. So this is where you found a waste, you hunted it down like it was a dog, and then you found it and you eliminated it. So what is there a story or an event you'd like to share? What was it like before? What did you do about it? What is the end process now?
Yeah. So I guess I'll give two examples. The first is whenever I was at Fort Carson, Colorado, back in 2000 and I think this was 16 or 2017, and we were in charge of the training and certification of a howitzer battery. So a howitzer battery is 7 howitzers, about 80 people, and their whole purpose in life is to receive targeting data and shoot the artillery to target, right? So I was placed in the position where I was in charge of training and certifying the guys who calculated the data, the ballistic firing data for the howitzers, and it's called the Fire Direction Center, the Battery Fire Direction Center. So one of the issues that we were having with our mission processing, I was talking about that sensor shooter kill chain, talking about the shooter portion of that, is whenever the Battery Fire Direction Center would receive a fire mission, it would typically take between 5 and 7 minutes for them to calculate the data, make sure that it's safe, that I know for 100% that every single one of these guns, ballistic solution, the round is going to go exactly where I intend it to go. Communicate that information to the howitzers, and then the howitzers actually execute it. It was taking way too long in the Fire Direction Center.
So the fastest it was ever was 5 minutes.
It's like 5 minutes
on average.
And after applying lean methodology to the process of processing the fire mission data in the FDC, we got it from 5 to 7 minutes to the fastest we ever did it was less than 10 seconds.
So you went from 5 minutes to less than 10 seconds.
Less than 10 seconds every time.
I want to clarify, you don't make cars, right?
I don't make cars. We do math. Like they do math in the Fire Direction Center, right? So I'll kind of walk you through how it actually works in the Fire Direction Center. So it's set up in like the back of a Humvee, basically in the back of a truck. And there's a little computer that we have there that talks digitally to their higher headquarters, and that's where they receive the initial targeting data. All they receive is a location, like a latitude, longitude of where the target is, and they may receive some more amplifying information like we need this many rounds shot at it, or we need this type of effect, which they can then calculate how many rounds they need to shoot at it, right? So there's a computer operator there. There's also a lieutenant who sits in the Fire Direction Center who's called the Fire Direction Officer, the FDO. He is the guy in charge of the overall FDC and in charge of the process and calculating the data. He has a assistant who is an enlisted guy, typically a staff sergeant, a non-commissioned officer, who has been in the Army for 10 times longer than that lieutenant has. And he provides the experience and wisdom to that lieutenant on just everything that he's done for the past 10 years. That lieutenant has only been in the Army less than a year, typically, right? So what happens is they receive that fire mission on their computer, and then when they receive that fire mission, the computer operator announces to everyone, hey, there's a fire mission. And then everybody gets to their positions as soon as he says that. He says there's a fire mission. The first thing that the Fire Direction Officer wants to know is where is the target location? We need to verify that where we are shooting is safe, meaning that there are no friendly units at that location, and that it is within the range of our weapon systems at that battery, right? So the computer operator calls off this target location. And the way that the military communicates target locations, we use a system called the Military Grid Reference System, or the MGRS. And it's very similar to latitude and longitude, but it's a lot easier to use on an analog map for me to plot and things like that. And so the way that targeting information is communicated is through a alphanumeric, basically, code. So 31 Delta Papa Tango 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 0 would be a very specific location. I plug that into the computer and it'll point where on the earth that's going to be, right? So he communicates that and the altitude of the target in meters to the fire direction officer, who then has to plot it on an analog map. He says, "Yep, okay, I plot it here. It plots within our range. It's safe. There's no friendly units at that location." So that's his first step. And the words that he actually says that we're taught to say in the schoolhouse, in the artillery school, is, target plot safe, does not violate any fire support coordination measures. I extract altitude 1, 2, 3 meters, and then he vocally announces if that altitude that he extracts is different than the altitude they received, he tells the computer operator which one to use. And typically the one the computer operator receives will always be more accurate because it's coming from a digital system versus pulling it off of an analog map. So he does that. The target plot safe, does not violate any fire support coordination measures. I extract altitude 1, 2, 3 meters. Use observer's altitude. Okay, that took me 6 or 7 seconds to say. So after that's done, the computer operator is waiting for him to say that. He's like, okay, it plots safe. I'm going to use the observer's altitude. And then I click a button that processes the fire mission data. And the computer does it almost instantaneously. It calculates what we call the deflection and quadrant for the howitzers. Deflection meaning which way do I aim left and right. Quadrant, which way do I aim up and down. So it calculates the data for all 6 howitzers. And every howitzer on the screen, it'll have every piece of information that howitzer is going to receive whenever I send that firing data to the howitzer, right?
So the only thing that had value in the whole process you just said was use this elevation or this one. Everything else was...
Yeah.
Is it required to be said, or they just said it for years because, well, they said it for years. Of course,
that's what we always do, right? Yeah, the two values added by the fire direction officer is, yes, I verify that the target is safe. Me being the fire direction officer, I'm the only one who has the authority to say that. The target is safe, and you're going to use this altitude.
Is he allowed to say, safe, use this altitude?
Well, you're getting ahead of me, but yes,
okay.
That's exactly what we did. Instead of him repeating back, the grid and saying all those things, I just said, hey, if everybody inside of the fire direction center just acknowledges, whenever I say the word safe and I don't tell you an altitude, that means that it's safe, and that means target does not violate any fire support coordination measures, and to use the observer's altitude. Mm-hmm. So I took we took something that took 7 to 8 seconds to say every single time, and it takes now less than a second.
Right.
The way that the computer operator communicates the target location was also shortened because, like I said, 31 Sierra Delta Tango 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 0. I don't need all that information as the fire direction officer because the area I'm looking at is only this big. If he tells me 6 of those digits, I know exactly where it is in my area.
Right.
Target is 1 2 3 4 5 6. Safe. Done. That's it. As opposed to
before, it was like, hey, you're in the Middle East. In this location, in this box.
In this hemisphere, is 3-1 Tango or 3-1 Sierra is in this hemisphere. Delta Tango is in the Middle East. And then the other one's like.
So you're just like, well, we're probably going to be firing somewhere in the Middle East, so we're just not going to change it.
Yeah,
is what you basically said.
Yeah,
it's like some.
Yeah, and the initial kickback I got from that is like, well, what if it's in a different grid zone identifier? So like if the sector that we're in is going from 31 Sierra to 32 Sierra, and it like splits our sector in half, how do we make sure that's communicated? It's like, all right, in that rare instance where that occurs, you can say the full thing.
How often does that occur?
It extremely rarely.
1 in 100 times.
Maybe 1 in 100 times. Mm-hmm. Everything else is always, just because the firing range of that howitzer is so small, very, very rarely will that ever happen. And if the 6 numbers that are communicated don't fall within that ring, and it's going to confuse them. He's like, well, this doesn't make any sense. That means that the target information is probably wrong anyway. And it's like, okay, something that was just said doesn't make sense. These 3 numbers don't make sense. Read me the full thing. Oh yeah, we can't shoot that.
Okay.
Right.
So you said the average was, you said the fastest you ever did was under 10 seconds.
Yes.
There was a country song. It's like, I'm as good once as I ever was. What was the average that you got your team to perform at?
This is probably the average, like the center of the bell curve is between probably 15 and 25 seconds.
So it went from 5 to 7.5 minutes to 15 to 25 seconds.
25 seconds, yeah.
often. So you shaved off like 93% efficiency
Yeah.
or 90, something like that.
Yeah. The singular thing that took the most time was we always have to what's called safe the data before we send it, right? So whenever we initially get to our firing position, we calculate a series of limits, left and right limits and up and down limits that we call a safety T that says if I had any firing data that goes beyond this number, that means that it is not going to land in the correct place. It's going to land in an unsafe place, right? And it's an easy way to effectively communicate whenever we communicate that deflection that it's going to be unsafe. And what we used to do is we would have to read all of that for all 6 howitzers, right? Gun number 1, charge 2, shell, high explosive, fuse, PD, deflection, 1, 2, 3, 4, quadrant, 1, 2, 3, and then they would be looking at their little safety thing and the fire direction officer would say, safe. Gun number 2, charge 2, shell, HE, fuse, PD, deflection, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you can, I got to do this for 6 guns. I was like, well, no wonder it took so long, right? And then a lot of times because you're calling them off vocally, you're like, wait, did you say 1, 2, 3, 4 or 1, 3, 2, 4? For which gun? Gun number, actually, did you just call off number 2 or number 3? And just the whole thing's, it's so wasteful. There's so much waste involved with that, right?
All this time, and all this time someone's getting shot at. They need support.
They need support, right? So there was an extremely simple fix that we did, and it was, hey, you're not gonna read it off audibly. We're going to attach a external monitor to the tiny computer that we have there, and that monitor is going to be right there in front of the guy who says safe, right? So whenever he calculates the data pops up on the screen. You can read much faster than somebody can speak, right? I can look at it. I quickly skim the data, and then I say safe, right?
So you took basically a manual process. You had some tech, and just said, hey, we're going to change the process to be from reading it off and doing all the radio stuff.
Yeah.
To I'm going to check it myself and say yay or nay. And that's who's in charge. Each howitzer does that?
No, it's the fire direction center. He looks at the data for all 6 howitzers, and then he says safe, and then they press a button, and then that data is transmitted to all 6 guns digitally. Over radio.
All of this happened because years before, Hugh introduced you to a system that helped you to learn to see and eliminate waste.
Yeah, absolutely.
Efficiently.
Absolutely, and look at efficiencies.
And you're not a manufacturer. I just want to be clear, right? We covered that part.
And my views do not reflect the views of the United States Army or the Department of Defense.
Oh, good call.
Are you sure?
And what you've done literally saves people's lives in the field who are under fire or who need assistance quicker. It legitimately translates to helping, obviously efficiencies in your processes with everything you described, but more importantly, when someone is under fire, you can respond quicker, more accurately.
Yes, absolutely.
And get involved in the firefight.
Absolutely. And I think one of the important things is, like I said earlier, it's not about improving the individual, the individual action. I mean, that's definitely that's the goal. That's the only way that you can get large change is to improve each action. But it's about a mindset, right?
Yeah.
Whenever you frame it to the firing unit, and you say, hey, what you're doing is taking 5 to 7 minutes. And they're like, yeah, that's about standard. That's about how long it takes us, right? And then you show them all of the waste, and you say, in that 5 to 7 minutes, this guy down there is waiting on you to do it. Like he's getting shot at, waiting on you. And it's like, what if I told you that you could do it in 15 seconds? They'd be like, there's no way. There's no way that I can do that in 15 seconds. It's like, I promise you can, because I've done it. Right. And then there's always some initial kickback, and there's like, oh well, what you're doing is unsafe. Is typically what people say. It's like it's not safe. It's like it absolutely is. Like all the same information is being communicated. It's just being communicated in a more efficient way. Right. The thing I love going to, I got to pull up my phone here to reference it real quick. Is the 8 wastes, right? That we talk about in lean. So. Defects, overproduction, waiting, non-utilized talent, transportation, inventory, motion, and extra processing. Those are all things that happen in anything that involves any sort of process. It's always there. And when you can label things and what waste they're associated with, you can very easily reduce the time it takes to execute those tasks, or just eliminate the task altogether.
So you have to be able to see it, and once you can see it, it's easy to get rid of.
Yes.
But the hard part is, can you see it?
Yeah, it's getting people to see it, and that's the hard part.
So that's great. You took it from 5 minutes to 5 to 7 minutes down to, on average, 25 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
That's wonderful. What does that mean? You have a real world example of taking a simulation. Can you share that with us? How you're in practice, right? It's great if you're at schoolhouse training.
Mm-hmm.
You actually put it into practice in a real world application. Can you go into that?
Yeah. So we did a really big simulation back in 2018. Where it was in like a fake country, and we were like invading and going to take like the capital city or whatever. And applying this methodology to the simulations where we didn't shoot any live rounds or anything. We were just simulating that we were, and we did it all with like computers and stuff like that. But applying it to each one of the weapon systems, it compounds, right? So it was a 14-day campaign. And in those 14 days, on average, each day we would process 100 missions, right? And so that, what was that? What's the math rule? 1,400? Is that right? 1,400?
Right.
Yes. 1,400 missions over the course of 14 days. And you look at what we did versus what previous units did in the past, and we shot almost 10 times more than every other unit. And we're trying to figure out why. Right, because the intelligence gathering process is exactly the same. The process of like the maneuver units moving around doing things is exactly the same. They're what's different, right? And they figured out by looking at it that previous units could only shoot that many because that's all they could. That's all they could handle. That's all the capacity. They didn't have enough time in 24 hours to execute more than so many missions because they took so long. It took 30 minutes per mission. When each mission only takes you 15 seconds.
Took 30 minutes every time.
You get through 1,400 in a day.
Yeah, right? It's you execute it, and then you get to spend the extra time, the other 29 minutes and 45 seconds, applying energy to like critical thinking and complex problem solving. And so
So you got rid of the non-value added time.
Yeah.
You have very limited amounts because it's always only 15 seconds for the value-added portions. And now you suddenly found an extra half hour every hour.
Yeah. And most units, the focal point of their mission execution is by shooting fire missions. Like that's what they spend the majority of their time and energy on shooting fire missions because it takes 50% of every hour. Right, 50% of my time is done doing this, so that's going to be the thing that I focus on. And they just stumble through it and they struggle with it, right? But if the process is cut down to where it only takes 15 seconds, that is no longer the
bottleneck.
It's no longer the focal point of what you're doing. Your time and energy, instead of executing a fire mission, is spent on critical thinking and complex problem solving. That way it's like, okay, I'm doing the complex problem solving, critical thinking, I have the fire mission. Oh, okay, do that 15 seconds later. All right, it's done. And then you go back to looking at like the larger problem. And that was what made us so successful is we instituted lean methodology, eliminated waste, and a whole bunch of different areas other than just the couple that I talked about, right? Especially with through digital systems. But we applied that and we were able to.
So you're in the military. You didn't go out and spend $1 billion to acquire a new widget.
No.
You didn't expend an extreme amount of effort on like retraining everyone for months at a time.
Yeah.
You literally.
Or hire new team members.
You didn't hire new team members. You didn't buy more artillery. You just.
We actually reduced the number of team members, but.
Oh
yes.
Well, so you reduced the number of team members, shot 10 times the amount, and as I understand it, you actually broke the simulation, and for the first time in history.
I don't know about history, right? Because
you took the fake city.
We took the fake city, right? And we won the simulation. It's supposed to be the what's the one from Star Trek? The
Oh.
The Kobayashi Maru.
Yes.
Right? The Kobayashi Maru simulation in Star Trek where you can't win.
You annihilated the Kobayashi Maru.
It's impossible. Like we beat the Kobayashi Maru.
And this is when they gave you your first 1-star general promotion. Oh, if not, you should have.
So during the simulation, you guys actually took it, and an interesting thing happened was there was I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about. There was a full bird colonel, and you're just some guy.
I'm a lieutenant.
You're a lieutenant
I'm
at the
at
time.
the bottom of the totem pole.
Bottom of the totem pole, you implement all these things. You're 10xing your capabilities. A full bird colonel in some other unit that's not your unit calls your, I don't know, tent and is like, who the hell's in charge over there? My guys are, what? Can you go into that?
Yeah. So that was a full bird colonel. He was working in another cell during the simulation or whatever. And basically we were shooting so much so fast that the higher headquarters started taking resources away from an adjacent unit. And this is all simulation, this is not real life, right? Took resources away from an adjacent unit to give to us because they're like, they're shooting 10 times as much as you. Like, you don't need all of these rockets and artillery shells and all this stuff, so we're gonna give them to them. And they called over and they're like, what are you doing different? Like, who's in charge over there, right? And me as a lieutenant on the bottom of the totem pole,
me, sir.
Yeah.
Voice crack.
It's like, sir, this is Lieutenant Balch. After 10 days of no sleep or whatever, right? And he was like, "What? Like, how are you doing this, right?" And like I said, I was in a different setting there. I was in like a command post. I was an operations center, and even there, like, you just apply lean methodology to that, and you find waste. It's why is the coffee pot over there? People
need it every day.
People need it every day. It's
Coffee
all the
pot.
way in the corner of the tent. I have to walk 12 feet to get a cup of coffee every single day.
How many people are in the tent?
Oh, there's 50 people in the tent.
50 people in the tent have to walk 12 times a day to go to the freaking coffee pot.
Yeah, right.
Move the coffee
Just move
pot.
the coffee pot. Move the coffee pot, and then you do the quick math, and you figure out you save. It's something ridiculous. It's like 8 man-hours a day by just moving the coffee pot.
But sir, we need an extension cord.
Then go get it.
Go get it.
Here's $5. Run to the pawn shop.
Right.
But just applying simple things like that,
So you were like low man on the totem pole, implemented some small changes, were 10xing it, and it was awesome. Are they still doing?
Caught the notice of a full bird colonel.
And they gave you the resources because the other departments or other tents weren't firing as quickly.
Yeah.
And are they still doing that now?
Probably not. So this is the thing that I think I definitely could have done better applying all these things, right? One of the things that I preach to my guys is that if it's not written down, if it's not codified in writing, it might as well not even exist. Because as me being the guy who is finding the waste, eliminating the waste, as soon as you remove me from the equation, it just defaults back to the 5 to 7 minute processing in the fire direction center, 30-minute processing overall, right? The thing that I should have done was codify it, did some sort of video blog, like wrote a paper, talked about what I did, and tried to share it with everyone. Created a standard operating procedure, an SOP. Is what I should have done.
You bring up an interesting point, though. So let's talk about buy-in.
Yeah.
Right? You see someone higher up than you. You're not the head of the military. A lot of these organizations, as we know from Paul Akers and his books, you have to have buy-in from the top down to have things stick. You may have caught that attention from a full bird colonel, right? And maybe some other big wigs, and they were impressed, and they allowed you to operate under certain circumstances with a little notoriety, maybe some autonomy.
Yeah.
You fix some things in your general thing, but the moment you walked away, your fear is that it just was lost in translation. It's completely gone.
Absolutely.
And why do you think that is?
So you're talking about buy-in, right? And I think there's probably like 3 levels of buy-in. There's buy-in up, there's buy-in laterally, so the guys that are my same rank to my left and my right, and there's buy-in like down, so the people that work for me. The buy-in up, yes, it got the attention of a full bird colonel. He's like, wow, what are you guys doing different? Very briefly explained over the phone some of the things that I was doing. He's like, wow, that's awesome. Then he hangs up the phone and goes on about his day. Right? Doesn't really change anything.
We 10x'd it.
10x. Yeah. It's like, wow, good for you. That's awesome.
And that was it.
Right. So I think having, just like you said, you have to have buy-in from the top down. I think something that a lot of people misconstrue is they're thinking that, if my boss doesn't buy into it, I can't apply lean methodology to whatever I'm doing. That's not the case, because if you have an organization of more than 2 people, you always have somebody in charge, right? You always have somebody, like you are the top down, right? You are the top down. And you apply methodology, lean methodology going down. But if you don't have buy-in from your boss, like that's okay. You just unfortunately can't influence the larger organization more than just your tiny little pocket, right?
But you were able to influence those around you enough to buy in with you and start to make these changes in your perspective sphere.
Yeah.
And that's where some amazing things happen.
There's the poltergeist. Yeah, my perspective sphere. So for lateral buy-in, that's always a little bit easier, right? Because there's not the dark line or the separation between like an 06 full-bird colonel who's been in the Army for 25 years and Lieutenant Balch who's like way down at the bottom of the totem pole, right? It's hard for Lieutenant Balch. It's hard for a colonel to say what that lieutenant is doing is correct. All of you need to be doing this. It's really difficult for that to happen, right? But laterally, it's a lot easier because another lieutenant just like walks over to me. He's like, "Hey man, like what are you doing different? Like it's taken me 10 minutes to do this stuff. Like, how are you doing this so quickly?" I was like, "Oh, well, sit down and I'll show you." Right. And then you immediately have lateral buy-in because they can actually see it.
Well, it's making their job easier, right?
Yes.
Everyone's job's easier now.
Yeah.
So it's less effort, same results.
Better results.
Better results.
Less effort with a better result. Yeah.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
And the buy-in downstream. So for the guys that work for you or the guys that worked for me, what's a great thing about the Army is I would show them this is why we're doing it, right? You should add a external monitor to your process because it will make it more efficient. You don't have to call out each individual number. You can just glance at them, determine they're safe, and then move on with your life, right? If you explain all this to them and they're still like, "Well, I don't buy it. I don't really think that's going to help much." Luckily in the Army, I can be like, "Okay, that's great. Well, you're going to do it anyway."
You do it, or I'll have you arrested.
All right, right? You're going to do it anyway. Yeah. So there's a great quote by a sergeant major that I had back when I was in Colorado Springs, who said, "I prefer commitment, but compliance will do." And I think it's a great quote.
That's extremely profound.
I prefer commitment, but compliance will do. I'm going to take the time because I feel like as a leader, the why is almost important. The why is almost more important than the what or the how. If I explain to you why we are doing something, that gives you the ability to understand the larger context and move forward with it without me having to micromanage you, right? So I'm going to take the time to explain the why and a little bit of the how in terms of the larger methodology of how we eliminate waste. But if you still don't buy it, it's fine. You're just going to do what I tell you to anyway.
Right.
But you're describing a very important component of lean, and leaders value the growing their people so much they give the why, right? They include everyone in that process, so there is that unique understanding. So people, you're right, either can subscribe to the culture or feel like this might not be the right place for them. Not in the military, but just in a general work setting, right? Where we own some real estate properties, a motel specifically, and where the team really, as us coming on as operators and proponents of lean, saying, "Hey, this is why we're going to do this. We would really appreciate commitment and get behind us, but if not, this might not be the right place for you." And those who want to really dive in and become better have a place in that system. Yeah. And those who don't can find somewhere else that operates under their code of conduct.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Absolutely.
The leadership, right? Buzzwords. For those of you who don't know, I was in a military school from age 10 through 23, and everything, every corner of the military, everything is leadership, leadership, leadership. And we've all, in various organizations, military or civilian life, we've worked under phenomenal leaders, and they usually share the why behind the vision. And we've also worked under people who are just complete garbage leaders, and they usually just tell you what to do with no explanation. I'm not saying that's not effective, but I'm saying it's generally less effective and there's probably more work and effort on that part.
Yeah.
If you haven't overarchingly explained the what to do behind him. So.
Oh, absolutely. And so in the military, we have what's called like commander's intent. So whenever I'm given a task, there is always intent behind it, like larger overall intent. If you apply it to like construction or contracting work for like homes, right? It's contractor. I want you to install this garbage disposal. He installs the garbage disposal. It's like, all right, now I want you to put this tile in. I want you to put this type of granite in there and these cabinets and all that. It's just that you are not going to have a very good relationship with that contractor because you are micromanaging and giving him extremely specific tasks and not letting him do his job. He's basically just
he's hands.
He's just hands. That's all he is, right? But if you tell him, there's the poltergeist again. If you tell him, it's like, hey, this is kind of what I see the kitchen looking like, right? I want it to have a very efficient garbage disposal system. I want a neutral backsplash, granite countertops that are within this price range that kind of look like this. And this is what I'm thinking for the cabinets. And this is the budget.
Go.
Yeah.
He will come back with a product that was probably better than what you had envisioned, because you're giving him the intent and the why and the creative license to go solve the problem for you, right? I forget what the quote is, but we hear it all the time in the Army, where it's don't tell them the how, tell them the what and the why, and don't tell them the how, and be surprised with what they come up with. Most of the time, it is that way.
Teach a man to fish.
Yes. Don't give a man a fish.
Cool. Well, so with that, we're going to move into the final sections of our podcast here, and it's going to be our famous 5. All right. So the first one is, what is your favorite lean book or resource?
Lean book or resource? Definitely 2 Minute Lean.
2 Minute Lean.
2 Minute Lean. 2 second. Sorry, 2 second lean.
2 minute
2 minute
lean is a very inefficient process.
Very inefficient. No, 2 second lean by Paul Akers. So the thing I like about it, right, is a lot of people go to self-help books. If you want to classify it as a self-help book, they go to self-help books hoping to open it that says follow these steps, execute 1 through 9, and your life will be infinitely better, and you never have to think about it again, right? Which is a lot of how like the Six Sigma like stuff is kind of fed to people.
The garbage stuff.
Yeah. What Paul does is he says, you can figure that out on your own. You can figure out each's individual steps. You can figure out how to make your kitchen more efficient. Like that's all on you, right? I'm not going to tell you the how. I'm going to let you figure out the how, but I'm going to tell you the what and the why, right? And his what and why in 2 Second Lean is very straightforward. It's about lifestyle and a way of thinking. It's not about him telling you like life hacks, right? It's about changing your way of thinking.
Yeah, certainly. Well, another thing we like to talk about, you bring up this what and the why. So we always kind of like to leave the audience with a little bit of wisdom.
Yeah.
What wisdom would you leave in regards to 2 Second Lean methodology, and maybe something that they could use to apply to their particular business that's not manufacturing? Let's be clear again, not manufacturing.
Yeah. That
would be extremely helpful.
I think the wisdom that I would impart is that you could literally apply it anywhere, right? If you find yourself saying, I cannot apply it to insert the name of task, lifestyle.
Brushing your teeth.
Brushing your teeth. I can't apply to that. You can. If you are finding yourself saying that you cannot, it's like you're wrong. Like
right.
You're wrong. And you're like, okay, you need to identify, I am wrong for thinking this way. What is the way that I can make this more efficient or improve it?
I think it was Taishiono, and I'm going to have someone in the comments comment that it's not, but I'm pretty sure it was Taishiono that was talking to his managers, and he said, do you not see a problem? If you don't see a problem, you are the problem. And basically he's saying you can always improve. There's always something you can do.
Yes.
Endlessly, something.
And for any company or organization that anyone is a part of, just like you said, if you don't see the problem, that means you are the problem, right?
Right.
You not only do you have to want to try to find the problems, but people need to be comfortable enough with you, and you need to be conducive enough to a healthy work environment where people can come to you with problems. They say, hey, Hugh, we have this big problem that just showed up. One of the things that we see in the Army a lot is people don't bring up problems because
They'll get punished.
if I don't bring it up, if I bring up the fact that this vehicle is broken, I'm going to get berated for having the vehicle broken in the first place, right? And so there's a great article called "Lying to Ourselves." I forget who the author is, but he basically talks about how false reporting is very, very common in the military, because we are rewarded for having the little box on the PowerPoint slide green. We're rewarded for that. If anything is yellow or red, it must be your fault as a leader that it is that way. Rather than having an environment where I can come and say, sir, this vehicle is broken and these are the things that I need to make it
Fix it.
to fix it, right? That should be something that is encouraged, not punished. So I think that's the wisdom that I believe. The first being that it can be applied anywhere, and the second is that you need to have a culture that is conducive enough to identify problems and people feel comfortable enough to bring problems forward.
That's good. What is your favorite business book or resource?
My favorite business book or resource? So I'll list two. So the first is, I need to look up the author real quick. The first is a book called Blink by Malcolm Gladwell. Blink by Malcolm Gladwell. And the overall idea of the book, and it's a fairly controversial idea, is that as a well-informed and educated leader, your initial instinct decision is probably the right one. And he says that over-analysis tends to lead to paralysis when it comes to complex decision-making. The reason I say this is a business book is because it applies to business as well. And it actually ties into the second resource that I'll mention, which is the Amazon 12 leadership principles. So whenever Amazon hires somebody, they always give them like a copy of the 12 leadership principles. And one of them is leaders are right a lot, is one of their leadership principles. And what they mean is that you as a leader, you are empowered, educated, and informed enough to make decisions based off of your own experience, wisdom, and instinct.
Right.
So trusting yourself to make good decisions is something that I think we, I'll use my experience, as a military, have started to shy away from. Because if I make a decision, there lies the possibility that it is the wrong decision. And if it's the wrong decision, that must mean that I am not good at my job, right? Well, that's not necessarily the case. So we're led into decision paralysis. We overanalyze the problem. We spend more time analyzing the problem than just coming up with a solution, right? It's probably Eisenhower. Someone in the comments is going to say it's not Eisenhower, but I think he said a mediocre decision made now is better than a good decision made 10 days from now, right? And so the book Blink and the Amazon 12 leadership principles, and there's 11 more, are probably my favorite resource when it comes to that. Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome.
We have coming up with the last two questions here. What do you believe sets apart successful implementations of Lean from those who give up, fail, or never get started?
That's a good question. So I think the difference is just sticking with it, right? When you embrace it and when you fully understand what it means to identify and eliminate waste, you start to see it everywhere, right? Yes. Once you start to see it everywhere, and if you are fully committed to lean lifestyle or lean methodology, you can't not see it anymore, right? It's kind of like the arrow in the FedEx sign. So when somebody points it out to you for the first time, if you've never seen it before, go Google FedEx right now, and you can see that there's an arrow and a logo. It'll change your life. You can never unsee it, right? It's like every time you look at the FedEx logo, you see it now. If you fully understand and embrace lean methodology, you'll see it for the rest of your life. Even if you're like, I don't really buy into this lean thing, you're gonna walk outside and you're gonna look around and be like, crap, you know.
It starts to haunt you.
Yes, absolutely.
That's a great word. Be haunted. Be haunted by it.
I think, and so I think that's what it is, right? Is that the difference is maybe people just don't fully understand it. Maybe people aren't fully. I wouldn't even call it commitment, right? Because
they never committed to it.
They never committed to it in the first place.
Yeah.
If you commit to it initially, you'll see it for the rest of your life.
You just stumble through until you figure it out.
Yeah.
You're committed to figuring it out. Speaking of being haunted, I remember I spent 2 weeks on site with a cabinet making company. One of the owners and I went to lunch one day, and it was in a grocery store. And he was like, didn't know anything about lean, at all for his whole life. This dude's like 40, like super high speed, super efficient. Shows up, we're out getting lunch, and he's like, why are there registers over there? I've got to walk, 60 meters over there.
Yeah.
And there's like 90 customers have gone in this hour to do this thing. Why don't they open this register that's right by here?
Yeah.
And it'd be haunted. I really like that.
So, Sam, your time has been awesome. Thank you for helping us see real world examples of how lean can really benefit any process, any way of thinking, that it can be applied in so many unique ways outside of manufacturing, and especially in ways that, again, that directly affect people's lives. Pretty amazing example that you gave us. What's the best way to people to get a hold of you, to connect with you, if people want to know more or just be a part of your, sphere?
Yeah, absolutely.
Pretty awesome guy.
So I appreciate that. Yeah, so I'm not on Instagram or anything. I'm not too big on social media. I'm on Facebook, so people can either direct message me or they can reach out to you guys who can put me in contact with them. Or I'll keep an eye on the video, and people say something in the comments, and I can reach out to them that way.
Great.
So I appreciate you guys having me on. I feel honored being your first guest and being your first interviewee.
Yeah.
I think it was
second guest.
I think it was an honor for us to have you on, and the whole purpose of our entire show isn't lean in manufacturing. It is lean not in manufacturing, and I couldn't think of something further away from that than death from above. So thank you very much for being on our show.
Well, and more importantly, weaponizing your mind to think lean.
Yes.
Yeah.
Weaponizing your mind, and you are in the perfect position to actually do that. When we do it, we're making a product or helping someone get a hamburger faster, and you're actually saving people's lives with this stuff. And we'd like all the listeners to take note. He 10x'd it. Super awesome results. And the moment he stepped out of it, it poofed, reverted back to the way it was. So if we can get this awareness out there that this is possible, that it's not just for manufacturing, that it's for every single thing we do, the more the people can think like this, the better a place the world will be. So that's my personal mission. That's Paul Akers' personal mission, is impact as many people to make their lives better as they can. So.
Right. All right. Thanks
Thanks,
everybody.
guys. Appreciate it.
All right.
That's it.
Okay. Cool.
Woo!